Although the present lectures are basically centered on the modern philosophy, however, before we go to Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza, the rationalists, and so on, and discussing individual thinkers of modern times, until we end up with most recent philosophers, it is desirable to make, so to speak, a step backwards. And this lecture will be about, let's say, the uses of philosophy. There are people who, when you even use the word philosophy, they look at you like you are coming from the moon, or perhaps some Martian, or from another galaxy. Philosophers are considered people who walk on earth with their feet, but their heads are in the clouds. Obviously, they cannot see much about practical living. So, and others would say that philosophy really is useless because it's something like a game, let's say a logical game, say chess or something else. All such views, of course, are among people who know practically zero about what philosophy really is. Among living things, it is obvious, only the human animal is capable of rational questioning. The reason is very simple. Man has a mind. Man has a self and a searching mind. He's not only an animal, but human beings are animals capable of rational thinking. The classic definition of man was, as we know, animal rationale, which means rational animal. An animal capable of reasoning, asking, and seeking answers. All the human life which each one is living is naturally nothing else but a string of decision-making and action. And those decisions have to be made under the criterion, under the supervision of what I consider worthwhile doing. As already mentioned before, philosophy, after all, is man's search for meaning. What I do here in this life has some durable meaning, or it doesn't, or everything is just flow. Everything is chaotic. I'm thrown into existence, not knowing by what and how. I exist, I do something, I run, I accomplish, or I am not accomplishing something. But certainly I am aging, like anything that is alive. And finally I disappear. Death is inevitable for anything that lives. Philosophy, therefore, is in a way a duty of every human being. I have somehow to answer to myself, what am I doing with my life and why? After all, the question is somehow important, because the meaning of my life, my doing, living here, existing for a while between the womb and the tomb, my life either will be chaotic, senseless, perhaps below the animal level even, brutal and chaotic, or it will be somehow directed. It will be somehow guided by my vision of reality. And this vision of reality is precisely what we call philosophy. It is friendship of wisdom. And it is essential to understand what really is philosophy all about. We are living in times which are to a great extent, are very confusing. The paradox of so-called modern man is the fact that we made some progress in knowing the surrounding us reality. We know about the subatomic particles, something about astronomy, about black holes, the Big Bang, the beginning of the galaxy's expanding universe. We know something about the RNA and DNA and so on. We conquered, we visited the moon, and we have telescopes, microscopes, computers, and we plan perhaps to make another trip to Mars. Nevertheless, the modern, so-called modern man is a human being lost. He very seldom has a deep, certain understanding of the most fundamental questions and truth and facts of being human. It is usually a man living in fear, because we know that man has in his possession tremendous power after splitting the atom, the atomic bomb, to perhaps even destroy life on this globe completely. The modern man is a frustrated man. We lived in 20th century through the great, so to speak, eruption of scientific discoveries and scientific progress, but we also saw, never before probably experienced, the brutality of man to man, the inhumanity of man to man. I have in mind the Hitlerian Nazism and the methods of starving and burning millions and millions of people like useless dirt in concentration camps. And this is not only one experience. Naturally, there are many others I could point out. What is essential here is that we are living in times of eruption of bestiality, application of torture, of social systems and regimes which are cynical, where the human being, the average human, means literally less than zero. And therefore, there is a general unrest. The individual person seems to be constantly living in uncertainty and fear, and he does not expect anymore, after knowing a little about history, some human goodness in his so-called neighbor. The neighbor is now wolf to him. Homo homini lupus. Man is the wolf to another man. All this armament of different countries, preparation for a possibility of confrontation on atomic level, all the degradation of any moral values, a kind of reversal towards animality, is unfortunately also part of our lives. Although no one denies that the modern man knows a lot more than people living in the medieval times when it comes to science, the medieval times, or even the ancient philosophers, the pre-Socratics. Many modern people, so-called modern people, have forgotten about the necessity to look for the answers. It's not only that they don't care very much about it, but they simply avoid any serious discussions, any deep search for meaning of human life. They forgot to even answer the question, who or what is man? In other words, we are somehow confused even in this very essential central problem. Who am I really? The question, which is inevitably connected to the other one. How should I live? It is a difficult question. But if a person doesn't know who or what I am really, then really I will never know how should I live. I will not understand what makes sense and what doesn't. Is life worth living? What for, if at all, am I really existing? Is there any purpose to my life? In this radical forgetfulness, in ignorance, everything somehow is sentenced to ruin, irrational, chaotic nonsense. We have modern thinkers who simply confess, philosophers even, who say life is absurd, human existence is absurd. Absurdity seems to be preached even by some philosophers in our times. How do I then know what is really and truly important and what is not? What is worth fighting for and what is not? What or who is man? This is the very crucial, central question. And every human being, every mature person, whoever has the courage to really think seriously and deeply, must somehow answer this question to himself. Who am I? Where am I going? What is the end of my life? How come I exist? Why am I existing? One cannot live normally unless somehow one finds answer. What does it mean to be a human being? Not to answer such a question is also an answer, because the answer is in the very actions and the way of life, let's say, the non-making a decision is making a decision. A escape from those nagging questions is simply not possible. De facto, however, everyone gives some sort of answer to the question, what or who am I? How? By the style, the way, the values, and the beliefs of one's very life. It is enough to look courageously into the mirror to answer, how am I spending my time? What is important for me and what is not? What do I really believe, truly deep in my heart and in my very conviction? And what is only a facade, a play, a game, a mask which I use in my social relationships or to safeguard my position in society? What is the content of my most frequent thinking and what is not at all, perhaps? Usually we evaluate quite often with maliciousness of the people. Very often we would say about others, he is a thief. This guy is a greedy animal. He is a liar. And she is a hypocrite. And so on. But that's not the question. The question is, what am I doing with my life? Because ultimately, if there is any serious responsibility, I am responsible for my existence. The ability to deceive oneself is simply amazing. We usually like to think ourselves as good people. We don't want to see the truth about our own mistakes, limitations, and downright evil intentions. We cover them up. We always look for some explanations. And if somebody tells us that, well, listen, you did this and this, what are you going, and so on. If he uses words which belittle our so-called dignity, we immediately check him up as our enemy. Why? Because he spoke the truth. And somehow, deep inside, we know he was right. So, what am I? This person here and now. The question is, of course, very essential, but it is not an easy or perhaps not very pleasant question, especially when I want to be honest with myself. We skip such questions because we are lacking in courage. we don't really like to evaluate critically our own selves. On the other hand, we know that only truth can liberate us. Lying to oneself, superficiality, cultivation of ignorance and stupidity, belittles and destroys and kills. There is something like a efficient running away from truth, especially truth about myself. This is why only those who have the courage to think seriously, who have a passion for truth, live truly. Naturally, with the question, who or what am I? The question comes about the complete, real, deep sense or nonsense of my life. It is easy to find out what is our relationship, what is the relationship of a person to serious questioning. For example, by a series of questioning yourself. Is there anything or anybody, for what or for whom, would you give your life? If yes, who, what, why? If no, who, what, why not? Number 2, do you believe in God? Is God in any way part of your thought, of your decision making? Or you are a comfortable atheist? Do you believe that to take life of another person, especially if this person is innocent of any serious crime, is ever allowed at all? In other words, does a human being have the right to kill and murder somebody else? In any circumstance, especially if this somebody else is innocent of any serious crime. Next, is freedom always a good thing? What is freedom? Do you believe you are free? Next, if you had only one day to live, what would you do with this day? How about 10 days? Or a month? Or 15 years? Next, is human life worth more than the life, let's say, of a cockroach or a flea or a bacteria? Is there any more significance to live as a human than, let's say, as a flea or a cockroach? And the answer is, of course, here very essential in philosophy, fundamental even. Is there any sense or meaning, durable sense and meaning to my life? Next, are words such as God, conscience, fairness, responsibility, love, loyalty, goodness, sacrifice, have any sense in my serious vocabulary in my life? Do they have any living presence in my life? And finally, a person can ask, am I responsible? If yes, to whom or to what? And why? If not, again, why? Because if a person has the courage to honestly answer such questions to oneself, a person will discover a lot about oneself. And sometimes this discovery may be very depressing and very discouraging. There exists such a thing like dehumanization. Only a human being can actually destroy one's humanity. Only a human being can drop below the level of impersonal animals. And it happens whenever we lack the passion for truth, the courage to think for yourself, the appreciation and the value of truth in life. This is philosophy. I just mentioned briefly in a sketchy way the uses of philosophy. As long as a human being lives, she or he has a tremendous treasure: time. The time of one's life. And another treasure, the ability to think, to decide, and to change. Time is inevitably, irreparably melting away. The big clock is ticking. Hours, days, weeks, months, and nothing can stop it. We cannot live twice, and nothing can be repeated. No one knows how much ticking is still left on the clock of his or her life. We do know that each day we are closer to the last moment, to the last day. There is no second chance. Those are those thoughts which I consider as important when we talk about the uses of philosophy. The reason why such thoughts should be recollected perhaps again and again is that life is somehow overwhelming us every day. We very seldom have time which is necessary to build up a vision of reality, to sit down, to be alone, to think in silence, to reserve sometimes periodically for solitude. The modern life is very noisy, filled with all kinds of so-called attractions, dissipating news and whatnot. And we also must remember that our times, our modern times, are quite often considered completely different from the times of medieval people or ancient people. This is, of course, nonsense. Humans always are humans, were humans, are humans, will be humans. The perspectives, the range of knowing, the attitudes change, but the inner core of human being does not. So we are by no means so radically different than people living, say, 2,000 years ago, or 1,000 or 3,000. Their life, their everyday existence certainly was very, very different than ours. In many aspects, in many ways. But their basic concerns, their fundamental purposes, their search for answers did not change. This is why when we take a book of history of philosophy, we find those distinctions like ancient philosophy, medieval, modern, and it is, to an extent, it is justified, but not very much. It also is, to a great extent, artificial. Why? Because philosophy is always dealing with the same fundamental problems, problems which do not allow to rest any serious, developed, sane human being. As old Aristotle used to say, all men by nature desire to know, because all men by nature are hungry for truth, and they are full of a sense of wonder. That means that philosophy will never disappear as long as humans exist. When we come to the question of modern thinking, of modern philosophy, the first step, we must distinguish between the two basic approaches. The so-called rationalistic approach, rationalism, and the empiricist approach, or empiricism. in those distinctions is also hidden the question of the relationship between so-called experimental sciences and abstract, metaphysical, philosophical search and truth. The question became somehow the center of many a modern philosopher. Modern philosophy with René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, Baruch Spinoza, 1632 to 1677, Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz, 1646-1716. And in 19th century, we have Immanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804, and Hegel, 1770 to 1831. On the other hand, knowledge based only on experience was represented by John Locke, England, 1632 to 1704, Bishop George Berkeley, 1685-1753, and especially skeptic, 1711 to 1776. In 19th century we have John Stuart Mill, 1806 to 1873, and Bertrand Russell in England, 1872 to 1970. In order to make sense of this problem, we have to characterize the basic principles on which those two approaches are based: rationalism and, on the other hand, empiricism. This will be the content of our next lecture.